Hello, nice to see you back. We are here with Laurent Decory. He will be speaking about how pharma and medtech can adapt launch strategy and customer engagement to an environment which is obviously transformed by COVID-19. So it's a pleasure to have him here. He is a managing director of BlueChat Consulting and board member of Aurealis Therapeutics. Basically, he supports pharma and medtech companies to adapt to changing market environments, build and launch solutions that add values to payers, health professionals, and patients, and redefining and implementing omni-channel go-to-market strategies and drive profitable growth. He's in the industry for over 20 years in international marketing, sales, and commercial excellence, in medtech, biopharma, over various geographies, including Europe, North America, and also some emerging markets in North and South Asia, Middle East, and Latin America. So it's a pleasure to have him here, and looking forward to your presentation, Laurent.
Thank you very much. So it's a great pleasure to be with you today. I will share my experience on really, of course, we've all been through an incredible transformation due to COVID-19, but I will try to project ourselves and the industry in a few months or years to come to say, what is the consequence of COVID, what will stay, and what we should do to adapt our launch strategy and also our customer engagement to what would be what we believe would be the future environment. And to do that, I will go through first having a look at what has been the impact, try to be factual on really the impact and slightly different situation of pharma and medtech. Also, what is likely to stay in post-COVID and how we should adapt. First, regarding launches, and we've heard from Samir, who is my business partner, how we need also to anticipate trends such as, for example, biosimilar surge or the changing country prioritization to really focus our portfolio and launch strategy, but also think about our customer engagement. And of course, if you are in pharma and medtech, your teams have had to adapt incredibly in the past few months. The question is how they will need to be reshaped in the future months, and how BlueChat Consulting can help you in those areas. So to start with, in a way, we should be happy to work in pharma and medtech in the sense that if we compare our situations to telecommunication, to oil and gas, to transportation or tourism, as a whole, there has been a rather positive impact of the COVID pandemic on pharma and medtech, with very different situations, of course. For some of you are manufacturing vaccines or protection equipment, you've probably seen an incredible surge in your business. If you're dependent on orthopedic surgical procedures, you've probably been hurt in your business, at least temporarily. But as a whole, the general perspective, and you can see already the impact on shareholder return has been rather positive. So, and we believe that this trend is going to continue despite some ups and downs. So that's really good news to start with. Of course, it has been really a definite roller coaster. As I mentioned, companies working in orthopedics, surgery procedures, depending on elective surgeries, have seen a dramatic decrease in their business, especially during the first wave of COVID. We still hear, how countries are adapting and putting more priorities on COVID emergency, freeing surgical resources. Of course, this is still impacting the business, and companies like Medtronic and others are finding ways to reallocate their portfolio to face this new situation. So that's the first type of impact, elective procedures being delayed, how to take that into account. The second major trend has been really how much it impacts the business. And as these are a few examples of companies heavily impacted by orthopedics business, such as G&G, Stryker, Zimmer Biotech, and you've seen the sort of -10, -20 impact on their business So that's really very significant for orthopedics, but it's also true for thoracic surgery, for example, where there has been a reallocation of up to 40–50% of the business. But if you think of oncology, we will also see, and Samir mentioned that patients have been delayed in their diagnosis and their treatment, and there will be a wave, of course, of catching up for those patients. So this, of course, needs to be taken into account when forecasting the market for the coming months. Another trend, of course, has been that telehealth is now pretty well established and is generally well reimbursed, although, of course, the situation varies between Europe, US, or Asia Pacific. But as a whole, it is now well established, even though it only represents something like 8 to 10% of the total visits. So even though everybody talks about telehealth and telehealth valuation of companies have been incredibly increasing, it's still only representing a small proportion of otherwise office or hospital visits, but it's just part of the mix. A third type of impact we've seen is really that the relationship, the interactions between the commercial teams and the healthcare professionals have evolved tremendously. In many cases, visits to hospitals or operating rooms were forbidden or severely reduced. And of course, a way to adapt has been remote interactions, remote visits, Zoom meeting with doctors or webinars. So of course, in a way, the volume of remote visit has dramatically increased, multiplied by 5, but it has not fully compensated the lack of face-to-face visits. So again, there's a different mix. The question is, what will be the future mix, and how to build commercialization plans, trying to, again, take all these trends into account. What we see also is that despite COVID, creative pharma and medtech have been able to launch and to launch successfully. So in a way, we could say as a whole, we are less dependent now on physical interactions, both for commercialization, for launches, and we've even seen trends of remote trials. So the whole value chain of pharma and medtech has had to adapt. There was no choice. The question is, what will happen post-COVID and how to adapt to that. So as a whole, what I believe will stay versus going back to the old way of working, and of course we can all anticipate that a lot of what we've seen during the COVID time will stay to a certain extent. So if you look at commercialization and interactions with HCPs, of course there was already different components. The face-to-face interactions were probably the most important impactful channels by sales representative or key account managers, also by increasingly peer-to-peer medical science liaison, higher scientific level face-to-face interactions, and then a number of events, whether they were medical congresses or launch events, and then digital, of course, had a certain share. During the pandemic, and of course, we're still in a way in the middle of that today with various situations, we had no choice. Basically, there was digital only. Now, what we can anticipate is that, of course, all these components will exist in the future, but with different mix. The face-to-face, of course, might stay, and my message, of course, is not that the reps should be removed, but just we don't know exactly how much, but it will be reduced by a significant percentage. Let's say, is it 20%? I cannot bet on that. It will be reduced. Probably the higher value medical and science interactions could stay because they are perceived as higher value by the HCPs. The events will go down, or we've seen a lot of medical congresses being replaced by a digital version of that, and today is an example of that. So as a whole, the share of digital interactions will increase dramatically. The question is, again, what type of mix, what type of capabilities, how can you adapt to this? Even if the percentages are not precisely defined, I think we have enough information right now to anticipate and adapt. How? So basically, let's look first at the launch strategy. If you think of a pharma or medtech company which had a certain launch candidates or pipeline, I think my main message to start with that we really have to focus more. So if you think of a certain portfolio, trying to assess your pipeline of future launches based on external opportunities of how much untapped potential versus your own sales potential, how to prioritize and how to deprioritize. Here, my message is that in a post-COVID world, this is not the right time to launch me too, to launch small incremental launches in small therapy areas or where you have limited untapped potential. So this is just illustrative, but my message is that you need to really seriously review your prioritization and probably focus on maybe half of the launches or maybe 2/3 of the launches you had in mind and say, where are we going to make a difference and where do we have a greater chance to achieve a higher growth so we can focus more of our commercial resources on fewer successes. Because if you think of the depth, if you think of the healthcare budgeting situation, is going to be extremely tough. And of course, I can bet that the better value will be the choice of healthcare systems, of course. So if you're focusing on fewer launches is probably the first step. The next step is to say how to not just launch products, but really move to customer-centric innovation in the sense that how do we add value? Is it just by product or combination of products and services, for example? So first, looking at the external prioritization, and the previous slide was an illustration of that to say, what is the smaller number of launches we can focus on? Second, really map who are the decision makers through a patient journey, say who really decides in country ABC? Are these the prescribers, the payers, the patients themselves, and what are the leverage points of your critical stakeholders? And is there a way to not just bring products, but also products and services to say if the solution today is better utilization of surgical resources or better utilization of healthcare budget, which will not go up, how can we as a medtech or a pharma company bring an integrated solution combining products, services, budget impact models, etc., to really add value beyond the product through a value proposition that really is relevant, and only then you will be in a better position to really launch this combination of product and services. And you have to think of how do I launch this new solution? Can I launch in a traditional way? Of course, the answer is not. And we will move to the second topic, is how to launch, how to commercialize in this new environment. But that's my main message, is less launches and enriching your products with services to really bring an integrated solution to your key stakeholders. So now how to move to really launches. The first thing is to invest heavily on launch readiness. And I've seen a lot of disconnect sometimes between global R&D, global marketing, or local countries who say, oh, the countries don't execute our global strategy, or the countries saying the products we receive from global never match the opportunities we have in the country. So to solve that, I recommend that you really invest on the launch readiness structured framework and formal handshakes. So basically the last 12 months of your pipeline, you need to establish, for example, quarterly launch readiness reviews and go through a very well-defined checklist of, what is the product? Do we have a market definition? Do we have a price strategy? Do we have a value proposition? Do we have the commercial capabilities? What will be the way to measure success of this launch? And then you can run a readiness review where the global teams will say, oh, we are ready. But then maybe the early launch countries, the local team will say, no, we are not ready. We don't have the adaptation of our messaging for our country, or we don't have the translation of the document, or we don't have the right pricing strategy. If you run those readiness reviews very closely, then you have a much better chance of success when the launch day comes. And of course, we can take more details if you're interested. Huh? So launch readiness is the absolute first step of success. The next one, where you're sort of -3 months and then the first 6 months of the launch, you have to invest on launch execution. Launch execution is simply running a number of monthly reviews, or frequent reviews, with just a few early launch countries to say, we have 6 months to build the launch trajectory and the success. And to do that, you should not look at lagging indicators. For example, sales, if you look at sales, it's too late. You have to look at early indicators, which is really the engagement with your key stakeholders, the engagement versus what you had planned, the interactions you have with your commercial teams, the campaigns and their outcome, or your account conversion funnel. Why? Because all of that, you can act upon it and data come very soon. And again, if you do that on a monthly basis and you take the corrective measures, I can bet that the launch success will improve and you will have a much better chance of reaching your launch trajectory. So that's really the second key success factors of, again, less launches, better focus, but very strong readiness and execution. Now let's move to, again, downward to how about the customer engagement, how to adapt to this new world. And to me, it's a very simple message is prepare to do more with less. Does it mean downsizing of your commercial teams? Not as rough as that, but probably less front-end resources, but also more back-end resources to have a different way to commercialize. Let me be a bit more specific. What we hear from healthcare professionals is that despite COVID, they don't want less interactions. They want more from commercial teams, but they want it in the channel of their choice, in the time of their choice. So some HCPs will say, I want to stick to in-person meetings, but it's a minority. Some of them will say, only thing now is webinars and virtual, and it's bigger proportion, but not so big. The majority will say, I want a mix of virtual and in-person interactions, but then again, with the channels I like and in the time I like. So of course, this has a big consequence on how you shape and build and adapt commercial teams. But the main message is that yes, HCPs still want to interact with our commercial teams. So how to reshape your go-to-market and engagement model is the main point. The first thing you have to do is, of course, segment and target your customers as you've done, but you need to do that more frequently on more parameters, including what is their channel preference. If they prefer digital or if they prefer to be called on their phone, you need to take that into account. Second is you really need to rethink your team size and structure. Do I need less people? Do I need higher value people? Do I need to have people organized by product? My recommendation is to really be customer-centric and organize your teams around a touch point, around a certain type of customer rather than by product. Thirdly, move away from just call plans or tactical plans to really fully integrated omnichannels, which means you really need to think of all your data silos and your system silos. Maybe you have a call center, maybe you have social media, maybe you have physical interactions that sit in different departments or database. You need to create a whole repository and plan for a complete omnichannel interaction plan, which means you also need to build not only front-end, but also back-end capabilities. For example, training your teams to be fully able to engage and excel in remote interactions, but also prepare back-office capabilities to feed all these different channels that maybe you've not used so much in the past. Change management effort, it goes really beyond implementing new platforms. It's about changing and reshaping your engagement model. Let me take one example of, say, we have targeted this particular healthcare professional because this person has potential and maybe this person has certain channel preference. What should be the first step? We say, yeah, we have identified this person, we want to interact with these health professionals. Then the first step is, what is the best first touch point? And here are my recommendations. Say, is there a back office preparation before even the first visit? For example, a first preparation call with a call center to say, does this person prepare a remote interaction or in-person interaction? If this person prefers a remote interaction, is there any pre-call material we can send, or just to confirm that the appointment has been agreed for us in day and time? During the first visits, if it's a remote visit, then of course this person could follow a certain guidance script to ensure the key messages are being delivered. If it's a face-to-face visit, the sales rep or the CAM should use closed-loop marketing, again, to convey the key messages, but also to capture the interactions from the healthcare professionals. So that's really the first step. Now, if we think of, let's say, the following months or 2 or 3 months after this first interaction, how can we reinforce brand awareness, build trust, and translate really and impact the prescription behavior? Then it's really important to build the mix that is relevant to this HCP. Probably follow up with medical marketing content or some webinar and video on a similar topic that has been discussed during the visit. It's very important to also give the voice to KOLs who will again reinforce the trust about a certain product or therapy. And finally, to collect the satisfaction, the wishes, the preference from the HCP, for example, Net Promoter Score, or capture any profiling to say how can we further adapt the engagement plan. So again, these are significant changes when we move to separate interactions plan to a fully integrated omni-channel plan based on the customer preference. But this is an absolute must for a post-COVID world. That's really my message. And to conclude, how can we, as Blue Jet Consulting, with our partner CSA Healthcare, help you going through this transformation? Well, basically by looking at what matters to you. It depends if you're in a sort of middle commercial due diligence or integration, or if you think of how do you move from products to customer-centric solutions, how to get ready for your launches, how to reshape your go-to-market model or your digital engagement. In all those areas, we can really help you, especially by identifying the 1 or 2 topics that do matter to you. And Blue Jet Consulting is a company, but it's also a network of business partners. One of them is Samir, that we heard from a few minutes ago. And again, Anders Kruger is our finance expert, and Cruz is our digital expert. So today, we can really build for you a virtual team in just a matter of days or weeks, whether you need a half-day, very small project on a customer segmentation, or a full team able to help you manage merger and acquisitions. And this is again how we work today through either consulting, interim management, or training, helping you address transformation in those topics, merger and acquisitions or complete transformation, or just operations, improving your operations through launches, go-to-market, or improve productivity of your teams. This is what I wanted to share with you today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Laurent, for the nice and interesting insights. So as we all have faced a disruptive situation over the last year, would have a couple of questions. So are you aware of any data, or do you have some experiences? As we all know that online means, of course, are nice to have, but sometimes they do not substitute the personal and presential conversation. So are there any data or any experiences in how many online visits do somehow compare to a personal visit?
Yes, there are some growing data, and I'll be happy to share some of that offline with anybody who's interested. We are moving now from, say, we plan calls to we plan an engagement. And to me, moving to an engagement plan means that you have to build a mix, a mix that corresponding to maybe a customized mix that corresponding to the preference of healthcare professionals. And now there are ways to, for example, estimate what is the true impact of a webinar versus a one-to-one remote visit versus, for example, in emailing. And of course, it's quite intuitive that a personal one-to-one remote interactions will be similar in terms of impact than to a real visit. A webinar with a KOL could also be very impactful if the level of trust is high. But there's also the impact of Zoom fatigue that we've all been through. That's why it's really important to think of a mix. And once you have detected that this particular HCP wants to keep, for example, 3 or 4 visits, plus 3 or 4 remote visits, plus 3 webinars and 2 emailings, then you have built basically a mix that corresponding to this HCP preference. And we can, for example, allocate some impact index to each of the channels to say, we need to have, for example, 2 or 3 remote visits to compensate for one-to-one face-to-face. But if an emailing has, for example, 10 times less impact, we will need much more emailings to reach the same engagement index, if you want, for the same. But nobody would want to have 20 emailings. That's why it's really important to build the mix and the orchestration over time, month by month, that corresponding to this customer. That's why, again, it's not one rep deciding all that. It's just a back office preparing all these Lego bricks, filling them with content, and then giving the rep role to orchestrate over time the number of interactions that more or less replace the equivalent of, let's say, 10 face-to-face visits. So really measuring the impact, but building the mix that corresponding to the preference is, to me, the secret, and we can now quantify that.
Thank you. And this already brings me to the next question. So I think all these activities perhaps require a completely different skill set and mindset. So as most of our colleagues at pharmaceutical companies have a lot of sales reps out there, but perhaps this new way of doing things will require to be a completely different person. How do you see this? Can we shift the traditional sales rep to these new functions, or would we need completely different people to do that?
I think the answer is both back office and front office. I think the secret is not just, oh, let's deploy digital platforms and everything will be solved. The digital platforms are just a first step. So having, for example, a CRM, CLM, a website, and emailing webinar capabilities is just, it's done. Second step is really having a data repository linking all these channels. So sort of BI, business intelligence, linking all these systems together. So that's a back office capability of, IT and business working together to prepare this data repository. The third step is really having marketeers able to navigate all these channels and fill them with relevant content. So probably you would need more digital marketeers, or you need marketeers to adapt and adopt digital content and brief their agencies according to the front end. The first step is to quantify how many people you need by role, and maybe you will need less, between brackets, low value sales reps and more high value key account managers, medical science liaison, but then you will still need some of them. The question is, do they need to be digital only, or a remote sales team? That's possible. I think the best would be rather hybrid reps able to have high value remote interactions, and when they can, face-to-face interactions. Can all the sales rep move to that role? Probably not 100%. So you need to define role definition, a capability framework, and probably assess your existing reps who can really adapt to this new role. Is it 50%? Is it 70%? I cannot say, but those who will fit in terms of capabilities will have to go to significant training to be comfortable and able to shine in this multi-channel mix. So a super good rep who has been really excellent in face-to-face will need a certain time of adaptation to be really able to close the business remotely. It goes really beyond just being able to have a Zoom meeting. Excelling remotely in remote sales is a capability that we need to build.
Thank you very much, Laurent. So I think all these managing all these omni-channel will be quite interesting in the future, and of course will be a challenge for companies. There are some further questions in the chat about omnichannel. Perhaps you could answer those. And of course, we'll also be looking forward to see you at the networking session. We are now about to start our first networking break, so I think it's a good opportunity to connect there. And thank you very much. And to all the listeners, we will be now in the networking break and be back with our agenda as mentioned in the schedule. So have nice new contacts and see you soon with the next session after the networking break.
Thank you, Mario.